Trump stood at the podium in 2017, speaking about a man he called a great American hero. Sergeant Evers was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors, Trump said.
That is what Medgar Evers was. He was a great American hero.
It was, by all accounts, a moment of unity, a recognition that Medgar Evers deserved to be remembered. But 7 years later, in March 2025, Donald Trump's administration erased Medgar Evers from the Arlington National Cemetery website. The same man, the same president, the same great American hero, whose memory was supposedly carved in stone, deleted from the digital record of the cemetery where he's buried. And Medgar Evers wasn't alone. Let's start with who Medgar Evers was, because to understand the obscenity of his erasure, you need to understand what he lived through, what he fought for, and what it cost him. Medgar Wiley Evers was born on July 2nd, 1925, in Decatur, Mississippi. He grew up in the heart of Jim Crow, a world of segregated schools where black children walked 12 miles each day while white students rode buses, a world where his schools lacked proper funding, textbooks, equipment, or even basic supplies, a world where racism wasn't subtle, it was violent. When Medgar was 14 years old, a family friend was lynched, dragged behind a wagon, shot, and murdered for allegedly insulting a white woman. That's the Mississippi Medgar Evers knew. That's what drove him, at 17 years old, to drop out of high school and enlist in the United States Army in 1943. His older brother Charles had already enlisted. Medgar followed him, partly out of admiration, partly out of a desire to serve his country, and partly, by his own admission, to escape the suffocating racism of Mississippi, even if that escape meant joining a segregated army that would treat him as a second-class citizen. Evers was assigned to the 657th Port Company, later known as the 325th Port Company, an all-black unit, white officers, black enlisted men, standard practice in the segregated United States military. His unit was part of the Transportation Corps, the men who unloaded weapons, vehicles, and supplies from transport ships. Not glamorous, not celebrated, but absolutely essential. In June 1944, Medgar Evers participated in the Normandy landings, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. His unit followed the initial assault waves into France, part of the famous Red Ball Express, the massive truck convoy system that kept Allied forces supplied as they pushed across France and into Germany. Evers saw action in Normandy, Le Havre, and Cherbourg in France, then Liège and Antwerp in Belgium. He served on the front lines of the European theater, delivering supplies under enemy fire, keeping American and Allied troops fighting. And he did it while facing racism from his own officers, the white commanders who viewed black soldiers as inferior, even as those black soldiers risked their lives to win the war. Years later, Evers wrote about meeting a French family during his service. Their kindness, he said, stayed with him for years, because they treated him with respect, with dignity, with humanity. A stark contrast to how many of his own countrymen, the men he was fighting alongside, treated him. Medgar Evers was honorably discharged in 1946 with the rank of sergeant. He earned a Good Conduct Medal, a European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 2 Bronze Service Stars for the Normandy and Northern France campaigns, and the World War II Victory Medal. He came home to Mississippi a decorated veteran, and immediately he tried to exercise his right to vote. In the spring of 1946, Medgar Evers and his brother Charles led a group of black veterans to the Newton County Courthouse to register to vote. They were met by a mob of armed white men who threatened violence if they didn't leave. The veterans who had just fought fascism in Europe were denied their basic rights at gunpoint in their own country. That moment crystallized everything for Medgar Evers. As he later told his brother, "When we get out of the army, we're going to straighten this thing out." And he spent the rest of his life trying. Evers used his GI Bill benefits to attend Alcorn Agricultural and Mechanical College, now Alcorn State University. He graduated with honors in 1952 with a degree in business administration. He married Myrlie Beasley in 1951. They had 3 children, Darrell, Rena, and James. After graduation, Evers worked as an insurance salesman, but his real work was beginning. In 1954, after the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education declared school segregation unconstitutional, Evers applied to the University of Mississippi Law School. He was denied. The school claimed he failed to provide required letters of recommendation. It was a pretext. The real reason was that he was black. But his application caught the attention of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In 1954, the NAACP hired Medgar Evers as their first field secretary in Mississippi, and for the next 9 years, he became the face of the civil rights movement in one of the most dangerous states in America. Evers organized voter registration drives. He investigated lynchings and racial violence. In 1955, after 14-year-old Emmett Till was abducted and murdered, Evers led the NAACP's investigation, tracking down witnesses and keeping them in protective custody when they testified at the trial. When the all-white jury acquitted Till's murderers after deliberating for just 1 hour, Evers shepherded the witnesses out of Mississippi for their own safety. In 1962, Evers helped James Meredith become the first black student admitted to the University of Mississippi, the same school that had rejected Evers 8 years earlier. When Meredith enrolled, riots erupted on campus. 2 people were killed. But Meredith stayed, and Evers had won. By 1963, Medgar Evers was one of the most prominent civil rights leaders in America. He organized boycotts of white businesses that practiced segregation. He pushed for desegregation of public facilities. He fought for voting rights. And he did it all in Mississippi, a state where the Ku Klux Klan operated openly, where white supremacists controlled the government, where being a civil rights leader was a death sentence. Evers knew the danger. For his protection, the FBI regularly followed him home. At least 2 FBI cars and 1 police car every night. Because the threats were constant, the hatred was palpable, and everyone knew something was coming. On June 11, 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered a televised address from the Oval Office, calling for comprehensive civil rights legislation. He framed the issue as a moral imperative for the first time. Millions of Americans watched, including Myrlie Evers and 2 of their children. Medgar was at a meeting at a local church. He returned home just after midnight. As he stepped out of his car in his driveway, carrying NAACP T-shirts that read "Jim Crow must go," a single shot rang out. The bullet hit Medgar Evers in the back. It traveled through his body and through the front door of his house, finally lodging in the kitchen wall. His family heard the shot. They ran outside. Myrlie found her husband face down in a pool of blood, keys still in his hand. Medgar Evers died less than an hour later at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He was 37 years old. The sniper who killed him, Byron Della Beckwith, a white supremacist and Ku Klux Klan member, was arrested within 2 weeks. The FBI recovered the rifle. It had Della Beckwith's fingerprints on it. Multiple witnesses placed him at the scene. But 2 all-white juries failed to convict him. The governor of Mississippi even visited the courtroom during the trial to shake Della Beckwith's hand in solidarity. It took 31 years, until 1994, for Della Beckwith to finally be convicted based on new evidence. By then, Medgar Evers had been dead for 3 decades. But on June 19, 1963, Medgar Evers was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. 3,000 people attended the funeral. The cover of Life magazine showed Myrlie Evers comforting their son Darrell at the graveside. Medgar Evers, the boy from Decatur who walked 12 miles to school, the teenager who enlisted to escape Jim Crow, the soldier who fought at Normandy, the veteran who came home to fight for voting rights, the father who was murdered in his own driveway, was laid to rest among America's heroes. And for 62 years, his service and sacrifice were honored at Arlington National Cemetery. Until March 2025, when Donald Trump erased him. Here's what happened. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump's first day back in office, he signed an executive order terminating all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across federal agencies. The order was sweeping. Every DEI office was to be shut down. every DEI contract cancelled, every chief diversity officer position eliminated. And critically, the order instructed agencies to remove any content that could be classified as promoting The order didn't explicitly mention historical content. It didn't say, remove black veterans from websites. But that's exactly what happened. By mid-March 2025, the Arlington National Cemetery website had been purged. Entire sections were gone. The African American History at Arlington page, deleted. The Hispanic American History page, deleted. The Women's History page, deleted. Educational walking tours that highlighted black veterans, Hispanic veterans, women veterans, all removed. And among the casualties was Medgar Evers. Evers had been prominently featured on the cemetery's civil rights walking tour, alongside other notable black veterans, like former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. The tour was an educational resource used by teachers across the country. It told the stories of black Americans who had served their country and then fought for equality at home. Now it was gone. Civil War historian Kevin M. Levin was the first to notice. He takes teachers to visit Medgar Evers' grave every summer. It's impossible to talk about his accomplishments in the field of civil rights without mentioning his service in World War II, Levin said. There's a straight line from his service to trying to expand voting rights and desegregate the University of Mississippi Law School. Any attempt to minimize this history is being incredibly dishonest. When Levin broke the story, the response was immediate. Congressman Benny Thompson, who represents Evers' district in Mississippi, called it a travesty. Medgar Evers fought to defend this country overseas and came back home, and decided that he wanted to make Mississippi and this country a better place. And because of that, as you know, he lost his life in his own driveway, Thompson said. But it happened. And people understand that it happened. And for the life of me, I can't understand why President Trump would want to remove a soldier's name from a website. Myrlie Evers Williams, now 92 years old, still fighting for the legacy of the man who was murdered in front of her, issued a statement through the family. This is a spit in the face to all who have served, honored, and fought for this country, she said. Any removal of names, history, and significant contributions of African American, Hispanic, and women veterans from the Arlington National Cemetery website demeans and denigrates their service. Race and gender do not preclude service to one's country. And here's the kicker. In response to the outcry, Arlington National Cemetery issued a statement claiming that Medgar Evers hadn't actually been removed. He'd just been moved. His information was still on the website. You just had to find it in different categories, like politics and government, or prominent military figures. But here's the problem. The old pages were designed to honor black veterans specifically, to acknowledge that their service was inseparable from their fight against racism, to recognize that soldiers like Medgar Evers fought 2 wars, one against fascism abroad and one against segregation at home. The new categorization erases that context. It sanitizes the history. It pretends that Medgar Evers' race and his civil rights work are separate from his military service, when in reality, they're the entire point. As Congressman Thompson put it, you have to scroll almost to the bottom of the page under Politics and Government to find out about Evers' service and sacrifice. Our president ought to be ashamed of himself for directing a policy that caused that to happen. And Medgar Evers wasn't the only one erased. Major General Charles Calvin Rogers was removed from the Pentagon's website entirely until public outcry forced them to restore it. Who was Charles Calvin Rogers? He was born in West Virginia in 1929. He joined the Army and rose through the ranks to become one of the highest-ranking black officers in the military. On November 1, 1968, near the Cambodian border in Vietnam, Lieutenant Colonel Rogers commanded the 1st Battalion, 5th Artillery. Enemy forces launched a massive attack that penetrated the base perimeter. Rogers was wounded 3 times over the next 2 days. Despite his injuries, he directed artillery fire and led counterattacks until the enemy force was repelled. For his actions, President Richard Nixon awarded him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. Rogers continued serving. He was promoted to Major General. After retiring in 1984, he became an ordained Baptist minister and spent his final years ministering to American soldiers in Germany. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. In 1999, a bridge in West Virginia was renamed the Charles C. Rogers Bridge in his honor. And in March 2025, the Pentagon removed his page from their website as part of Trump's DEI purge. A Medal of Honor recipient, wounded 3 times defending his men, erased. The Pentagon claimed it was a mistake and quickly restored the page. But the message was clear. Acknowledging the service of black veterans was now classified as diversity ideology. The purge went beyond individuals. Entire categories of history were scrubbed. The Pentagon removed articles about the Navajo Code talkers, the Native American soldiers who used their tribal languages to create an unbreakable code during World War II. Their identity wasn't incidental to their service, it was essential. But acknowledging that was apparently too woke. The Pentagon removed an article about Jackie Robinson's service in World War II and his role as the first black Major League Baseball player, removed and only restored after public backlash. The Defense Department removed thousands of web pages and images honoring the contributions of women and people of color, pages about the Tuskegee Airmen, pages about the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, an all-black, all-female unit that processed mail in Europe during World War II, pages about Hispanic veterans, about women breaking barriers in the military, about Medal of Honor recipients who happened to be people of color. All gone, classified as DEI content, erased in the name of eliminating divisive programs. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, a former Fox and Friends host who now controls the U.S. military, held a town hall meeting where he declared that the phrase, "diversity is our strength," is the dumbest phrase in military history. He issued a memo stating that Identity months are dead at DOD. Black History Month, gone. Hispanic Heritage Month, gone. Women's History Month, gone. Hegseth instructed the Pentagon to remove all content from the Biden administration that promoted DEI, which apparently included any acknowledgement that black, Hispanic, and women veterans existed and made contributions worth honoring. Pentagon employees told reporters they weren't sure if they were even allowed to mention Martin Luther King Jr. Day anymore, since it's named after a black civil rights leader. That's where we are. Federal employees are afraid to acknowledge federal holidays because they might be classified as promoting diversity. Here's what makes the Medgar Evers erasure so particularly grotesque. Donald Trump knew exactly who Medgar Evers was. Trump personally praised him. Trump signed legislation honoring him. Trump stood in that museum in 2017 and said Medgar Evers' memory was carved in stone as American heroes. And then, 7 years later, Trump's own executive order led to Evers being erased from the cemetery website. Former Mississippi Supreme Court Justice Reuben Anderson, the man who gave Trump that museum tour in 2017, told reporters he couldn't believe it. "That's got to be a mistake," he said. "That involves a great American who served in the military and was one of the most courageous Americans of all time." But it wasn't a mistake. It was policy. Trump's executive order created the legal framework. Pete Hegseth provided the ideological justification, and federal agencies complied, erasing black veterans from the historical record in the name of eliminating divisive content, because apparently, acknowledging that Medgar Evers faced racism is divisive. Stating that he fought for voting rights is identity politics. Honoring his service alongside his civil rights work is woke ideology. The truth, factual, documented, historical truth, is now classified as too controversial to display on a government website. Let's be very clear about what this is. This isn't about eliminating preferential treatment. This isn't about ensuring meritocracy. This isn't about moving past identity politics. This is about controlling which version of history gets told. Medgar Evers fought at Normandy. That's a fact. He was denied the right to vote when he came home. That's a fact. He became a civil rights leader. That's a fact. He was assassinated by a white supremacist in his own driveway. That's a fact. He was buried at Arlington with full military honors. That's a fact. None of this is disputed. None of this is controversial among historians. It's simply what happened. But the Trump administration has decided that some facts are too uncomfortable to acknowledge, that honoring black veterans specifically, recognizing that their service was inseparable from their fight against racism, is divisive. That telling the full story of American military history, including the segregation and discrimination that black soldiers faced, is promoting an ideology. So they erased it. They took down the pages. They removed the walking tours. They deleted the educational content. They made it harder to find information about black veterans, Hispanic veterans, women veterans, anyone whose story complicates the sanitized narrative they want to tell. And they did it while claiming to honor veterans, while claiming to respect military service, while claiming to preserve American history. The hypocrisy is staggering. Trump, who dodged the draft with dubious claims about bone spurs, is erasing actual veterans from the historical record. Hegseth, who served but has spent his career exploiting veterans for personal and political gain, is declaring that acknowledging the service of black soldiers is somehow disrespectful to the military. Meanwhile, the same administration that erased Medgar Evers from Arlington's website is restoring Confederate monuments. Trump ordered the return of a massive Confederate monument to Arlington National Cemetery, a monument that depicts enslaved people as happy, willing servants, a monument that celebrates the lost cause mythology and romanticizes the Confederacy. Panels honoring soldiers who fought against fascism? Removed. Monuments glorifying soldiers who fought for slavery? Restored. Black veterans who earned medals of honor? Erased. Confederate generals who committed treason? Celebrated. The pattern is unmistakable, and the message is clear. If history makes certain people uncomfortable, delete it. There's a broader context here that can't be ignored. This isn't happening in isolation. The Trump administration has systematically targeted any acknowledgement of racism in American history. In February 2025, Trump complained publicly that the Smithsonian teaches how bad slavery was. Not that the Smithsonian teaches it incorrectly, not that they exaggerate it, that they teach it at all. The President of the United States complained that America's national museums are acknowledging that slavery was bad. Think about that for a moment. The administration has gone after historical sites, museums, educational programs. The National Park Service rewrote accounts of the Stonewall Uprising to remove references to transgender people. School districts have been pressured to remove books about civil rights from libraries. Federal grants for teaching about slavery and segregation have been eliminated. And now, military cemeteries and defense websites are being purged of content that acknowledges discrimination against black soldiers. This is a coordinated effort. It's not accidental. It's not bureaucratic confusion. It's a deliberate campaign to erase certain stories from the official record. Because here's what Trump and his allies understand. History shapes identity. The stories we tell about ourselves determine what we believe is possible, what we believe is acceptable, what we believe is American. If the only military history we teach is sanitized, if we talk about brave soldiers fighting for freedom, but never mention that black soldiers were segregated, discriminated against, and denied the rights they were fighting for, then we create a false narrative. We pretend that racism was always somewhere else, always in the past, always someone else's problem. But if we tell the full story, if we acknowledge that Medgar Evers fought at Normandy and then came home to face armed mobs when he tried to vote, then we're forced to reckon with uncomfortable truths. We're forced to admit that American heroes faced American injustice, that the country they died defending was the same country that denied them equality. That truth is uncomfortable. It complicates the simple story. It makes people think critically about history. And that's exactly what Trump's administration wants to eliminate. Myrlie Evers Williams is 92 years old. She's spent 62 years fighting to preserve her husband's legacy. She became a prominent civil rights leader in her own right, serving as chairwoman of the NAACP from 1995 to 1998. She overhauled the organization's finances and secured its future. She founded the Medgar Evers Institute. She delivered the invocation at President Barack Obama's second inauguration in 2013, 50 years after her husband's murder. And now, in the final years of her life, she's watching the Trump administration erase her husband's service from the website of the cemetery where he's buried. "This is a spit in the face," she said. And she's right. Medgar Evers gave everything. He served his country in war. He fought for justice at home. He was murdered for it. He left behind a widow and 3 children. He was buried with full military honors among America's heroes. And Donald Trump, who dodged the draft, who never served a day in uniform, who called prisoners of war losers, has decided that Medgar Evers' story is too divisive to be honored on a government website. Congressman Benny Thompson said it best. "Why are you going to these lengths to erase people of color, whether they are African American, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans who have fought and defended this country? Our president ought to be ashamed of himself. But Trump won't be ashamed, because this isn't a mistake. This isn't an oversight. This is the point. The erasure is the goal. The sanitization is the strategy. The silencing is the objective. And if we let it stand, if we don't fight back, if we don't demand that these pages be restored and these stories be told, then we're complicit in the erasure." Medgar Evers is still buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone is still there. Dutch families don't adopt his grave the way they do at Margareton, but visitors still come. Historians still bring teachers to his gravesite. People still lay flowers. But if you go to Arlington's website looking for information about him, looking for the civil rights walking tour that used to honor his service, looking for the educational content that connected his military service to his civil rights work, you'll have to search. You'll have to scroll. You'll have to dig through categories that don't acknowledge the full truth of his life. The man who fought at D-Day and then came home to be denied the right to vote. The man who investigated Emmett Till's murder and then became a martyr himself. The man who was called a great American hero by the president who would later erase him. That man's story has been buried again, not in the ground, not physically, but digitally, bureaucratically, officially. And that's exactly how history gets erased. Not all at once, but piece by piece, page by page, link by link, until one day people stop looking, until one day people stop knowing, until one day the full truth of Medgar Evers' life and service and sacrifice is just gone. Unless we refuse to let that happen. Medgar Evers fought 2 wars. He won neither in his lifetime. But his fight didn't end when Byron Della Beckwith pulled that trigger. It continued through his widow, through the civil rights movement, through the legislation his death helped pass, through the memorials and monuments and museums that bear his name. And it continues now, because every time someone tries to erase him, we have to tell his story louder. That's what Myrlie has done for 62 years. That's what historians like Kevin Levin do when they bring teachers to Arlington. That's what Congressman Thompson did when he spoke out. And that's what we have to do. Remember Medgar Evers. Tell his story. Refuse to let him be erased. Because his memory isn't just carved in stone at Arlington National Cemetery. It's carved into the history of this country. And no executive order can erase that.